Chinese Communist Party's brutal zero-COVID policy has Chinese people running scared. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The Chinese Communist Party runs China through fear. Even Dr. Doom doesn't do that in his nation of Latveria. And his name is Dr. Doom. It's so common for people to be nabbed up by police that they've created a verb for it: to be disappeared. This is pretty common for a communist regime. The Chinese Communist Party has another verb too: doujang. Simply put, it means to fight or struggle against something. But it's so much more. The Communist Party designates a group as the enemy, and the entire society must doujang against them. Falun Gong getting too popular? Doujang. Christians still believing God is above the Communist Party? Doujang. Winnie the Pooh? Doujang. And that works great when you're targeting small, isolated groups. But China's zero-COVID policy has changed things. By struggling against the virus, the party has essentially targeted every Chinese person, since anyone can get it. So instead of isolating and targeting a specific group, the Communist Party is now persecuting everyone, which I guess is progressive. Hashtag inclusive. The zero-COVID policy is absolutely absurd. You can't handle a contagious disease the way you handle, say, a Chinese dissident. Which is a shame, because COVID would be literally the only time I'd be happy to see China's authorities disappear something. So the party's left to do some rather performative stunts. Spraying this much disinfectant into the air is surely good for people's health. So is having people line up for hours in the dark and the rain to get a COVID test. But it's not just people getting COVID tests, it's also cats, geese, other animals big and small. Because that's what's spreading COVID at buffets. Not the lack of sneeze guards, it's the crab legs. But COVID could be anywhere. That's why they test inanimate objects like shoes, trucks, and Gwyneth Paltrow. You watch her acting and tell me she isn't made of wood. COVID testing has become such a part of daily life that young children are even making it part of their playtime. This actually seems like a good way to spread COVID. But remember, while it's easy to laugh at these things, the Chinese Communist Party rules through fear. And Chinese people are legitimately terrified of lockdowns and quarantine camps. I'll tell you more after this quick commercial break. Welcome back from that quick commercial break. In fact, I bet it was so quick, it was just a brief black box, because YouTube probably will demonetize and age restrict this episode for violating its vague community guidelines. That's why we need your support. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment for the algorithm. And definitely share these episodes with your friends and family, because YouTube sure won't. And if you can, please consider supporting the show over on Patreon. It really only takes $1 an episode to help us keep China uncensored. The link is below. So there are currently more than 232 million people under lockdown in China. This is a scary thing for people in China, since people have died of starvation under these lockdowns. But even worse than being locked down is the prospect of being sent to one of China's infamous quarantine camps. These camps can be massive. Here's one quarantine center with 14,000 beds. And these camps are often unsanitary messes, not the kind of place you want to go to, especially since authorities have been known to beat your pets to death while you're locked up. Not even Dr. Doom is that overtly evil, and again, his name is Dr. Doom. Imagine being locked up for weeks in a crowded tent with no ventilation, although this one at least has partitions and bedding. Meanwhile, this quarantine camp has serious "the beatings will continue until morale improves" energy. The way zero-COVID works is this. If you were vaguely in the same area as someone who tests positive, authorities can track you down and then literally drag you to a quarantine camp, which is why people go to great lengths to avoid it. This footage allegedly shows workers at a Foxconn factory in Zhengzhou fleeing the mandatory factory lockdown. This factory makes electronics, including half the global supply of iPhones. Some workers walked as much as 25 miles to escape. Now, this Foxconn factory is the biggest one in China, housing about 200,000 workers. I mean, that's like it's a small city in of itself. And it had been battling a COVID outbreak for several weeks. Workers had been locked in at the factory so that production could continue. But people kept testing positive for COVID. One worker who escaped said he had heard that 20,000 people had been quarantined on site, but management wouldn't say how many were infected. Workers were fleeing because they were afraid of getting COVID, or afraid of being quarantined, or just fed up with it all. In interviews with the Washington Post, employees said they were pushed to go back to work before it was clear they were not contagious, sent to quarantine centers that housed both confirmed cases and uninfected close contacts, and left without medicine or enough food. And rumors are flying. This video allegedly shows people screaming that a dorm room of several Foxconn workers were all dead. This is like a zombie movie if the measures used to stop the zombies were worse than the zombies themselves. Foxconn has denied the authenticity of the video, saying it was maliciously edited. But the rapid spread of the video on social media does show how the Chinese regime stokes fear around COVID. You see, Chinese propaganda has been hyping up the dangers of COVID for years now in order to justify their zero COVID policy. So when people hear that everyone in a dorm room died of COVID, they believe it. And then they get even more scared. Foxconn has since said they're allowing anyone to leave the factory who wants to. The fact that they even had to say that is not a good sign. But they're also offering a cash bonus for people willing to stay. But even if workers leave the factory, they can't escape quarantine when they get back to their hometowns. This video allegedly shows COVID workers blocking factory workers from entering. Meanwhile, the happiest place on earth was enforcing some mandatory fun. Hopefully no one starves there, because I'm not sure if there's room in the haunted mansion for even more ghosts. Guests were trapped inside until they tested negative. How many guests? Here's another example of how zero COVID works. Someone who was at Shanghai Disneyland tested positive after already leaving the park. As a result, almost 900 people were quarantined and more than 67,000 people were tested. You can see why Chinese people are terrified of getting caught in one of these snap lockdowns. In September, at a Shanghai Costco, people had to flee the store to avoid lockdown. And back in August, customers at an IKEA in Shanghai did the same thing, which must have been terrifying, especially for the guy who was there with his girlfriend and begging to leave for 4 hours already. Of course, the Communist Party understands people's fears. That's why when an airport went into lockdown in Yunnan province at the beginning of October, the COVID guards came out with guns to prevent people from leaving. People were shouting, "Are you going to kill us all?" Personally, I wouldn't test the Chinese Communist Party on that one. And China Uncensored would not be possible without support from viewers like you, either by liking and subscribing, sharing the show with friends and family, buying an awesome t-shirt, or through direct support on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Those are the fans I call the China Uncensored 50-cent army, who join us in the fight against the Chinese Communist Party. As a thank you to them, I respond to their questions or comments. Today's question comes from Shinny the Pooh. Why is it so hard to talk some sense into China/CCP? Can't the entire world do anything to stop this mess? I know that the UN is essentially owned by the CCP, but still, it's 1.4 billion lives they're screwing with after all. First of all, great name, Shinny the Pooh. But this is also a really important question. Why can't we talk sense into the Chinese Communist Party? Any rational government wouldn't want to blow up its own economy and turn its people into enemies, right? Then again, if the CCP were rational, I'd be out of a job. And it's not just the zero COVID policy that seems rational. You'd think the CCP would understand that it stands to benefit from fighting climate change. The pollution in China is insane. And I feel like many people in Western governments or in think tanks look at the CCP this way. Surely the CCP wants to be part of the rules-based international order because it's in the CCP's own interests. Yes, that all sounds very rational. But the CCP's behavior, especially its zero-COVID policy, shows that it's not rational, at least not according to what Western governments think is rational. The Chinese Communist Party is rational when it comes to one thing: staying in power. It will do whatever it has to for that. So treating the CCP like a normal government is wrong. That'd be like trying to teach a great white shark to sit, shake, and roll over. The CCP is a Marxist-Leninist regime that thrives off struggle, dojo. Communists believe struggle is what drives society forward. So while normal people think we can all get along when we find shared interests, the CCP just sees that as an opening to attack. Thanks for your question and your support, Shinny the Pooh. And thank you to everyone else. You can support China Uncensored by going to patreon.com/China Uncensored and contributing $1 or more per episode. And as one of the perks, you can ask me questions that I'll answer on the show. Or we have fantastic merch for sale over at ChinaUncensored.tv/merchandise. The links are below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.